And even though we know that it's like really run down, especially because it hasn't been inhabited for a while, but like to keep an open mind about that.
Yeah, and more we've really realized that we have similar situations happening here in Aotearoa, that with architecture projects, when the client from the start doesn't quite know what they want out of it, then the whole project becomes a kind of the main challenges are around relationships and negotiating just between people, when actually like a lot of all the stuff should be a lot simpler. The actual building and the detailing of it should be a lot simpler. And in studio projects, you get to focus on that part so much. But the reality is always
the politics of whoever you're working for, the politics of the context dictates so much. You know, so there's so much that was outside of our control. Yeah, obviously.
But it's so they the family that is kind of taking the lead of is basically in charge of maintenance and stuff. So a couple of the families were living there, and they are also doing a little bit of farming now, where they're growing their vegetables there. And sorry?
Is that out the back?
Underneath the power lines or in a different area?
So it's the common washing area at the back, where there's a little water tank. So they're growing it there.
Oh, okay, nice.
Okay, that's really good to hear. We always wondered if that might happen.
Yeah.
So we were also quite amused that they took it up and they were starting. So they were growing like carrots and some herbs and stuff like that. So they were doing that. And they change it by the season. So they change their pattern of growing the vegetables as well. So that was quite nice.
Yeah.
How many people are living there at the moment?
I think there were about 3-4 families, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, so very empty.
Yeah. Everything was more or less empty. Nothing was really being used. The learning or the children's center was completely shut down, actually.
Really?
That's a shame to not be able to see that.
But they opened it for us. They also opened up the entire pivoted doors. So they showed us how it kind of worked, and they were very kind.
Yeah.
Siraj hosted you?
No, so he couldn't be available. So there was another guy called Dilwara, who apparently Dilwara wasn't there so much when you guys were building it, but he knew quite a lot about the project.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So anyway, so like we wrote to you guys, so they have already gone through the presentation that you made last semester. And as they've already gone through that, we thought that we would like to use this time more as a conversation where they will ask you more questions pertaining to what they are doing, and perhaps could learn more from your own experiences, failures, successes.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And plus, because I think the biggest advantage is they got to go and visit your project and be able to see it live. So they also have some questions pertaining to that, which they've added to the list. So Rajiv, who is heading this with you?
Me and Simran.
Okay, so we have, Simran, right. So that's Rajiv and Simran. They're going to be moderating the entire session. So they'll be the ones who will ask you the questions, and they've also taken some questions from their peers and they've collated it. So they'll lead the whole session, but everyone else, you all are free to kind of contribute if you feel like it, or if you want to take that conversation ahead. Okay, so Rajiv, Simran, over to you guys.
Thank you. I must tell you that I instantly became your fan when I saw your presentation and the site. Just very amazing. The overall structure is like, okay, we understand it has to be low cost and things, but the small details that you did was really, really amazing. So I have like few questions. So first one was, what were the main tools of community engagement that you use in these projects? So before even starting this project, how did you gather the information about how the workers live, what are their lifestyles, etc.
Yeah. So, do you know that the project started from my master's thesis research? It was my final year project. So I was doing mostly, it's quite interesting actually, in New Zealand, we have a really strong ethics approval process. So I wasn't allowed, when I was doing site research in in India, for the New Zealand University, I wasn't able to go out and interview people as such. I would have had to go through a 3 months ethics approval through a committee. So my thesis supervisor said, try and gather data just by observing the kind of forensic architecture in a way, seeing what is on the site and learning through observation of the built environment. So I spent I spent half of my thesis year in India, and then I went back and did an extension the year after. So all up there was several months or 10 months of on the ground site field research, just documenting labor colonies. And I was also engaged with a couple of NGOs and reading research papers through them, but mostly getting the sort of more information about the labouring community through the NGOs, because I guess my position on it is that as architects, we're not really trained we're not psychologists. So NGOs are a really great resource because that's sort of their field. And if we can kind of take the architectural information about human habitat from their work, so that's sort of what I tried to do.
I should just say, first of all, though, when Hannah was doing her site research in Ahmedabad, I think that she was very lucky in that she could visit so many places.
Yeah.
I think at that time there was slightly less awareness of how bad of a condition this was for people on developers' part. And I think that at that time, Hannah was able to visit a lot of places that now
or anything as we were building, right? So
no,
we just had a computer model, and then the materials as day to day would change with the person we were building it with.
Yeah.
Some a local contractor.
And we would often just draw simple things in the dirt to discuss ideas. But on the farm with that first project, we were able to think, whenever we had a maybe question ourselves about should we do it this way, should we do it that way, we'd be able to just turn around, find the person who was going to be living in that unit and ask them what they wanted. And
but that was a really small scale project, so we could do that. But the complexity with the second project is that it's this constantly changing community. You don't know if people are there for 2 weeks or 2 years, and you don't know if they're single men or a family group. So it's really hard to find kind of averages. And everybody, of course, speaks different languages from the different places in India. But for that second project, we were lucky in that the developer that hired us also hired a social impact consultancy called Fourth Wheel that are based in Mumbai, but they were actually doing community engagement before we arrived. And so before we started on the project, they had some documentation of feedback from the community about what their priorities were. And then as we started, we did a few more workshops with the labouring community to find out what they thought of, for example, communal kitchen spaces or
there we were able to allow
spaces,
someone else was able to do the workshops for us, so they could communicate in much more languages than we could, and
also
they could run it.
much more skills in talking to this community, which we don't have.
Yeah.
Not only because we're foreigners, but because I think, as architects, we're not typically trained to talk to communities in a way that is actually getting genuine information about what their needs are.
Yeah.
Like we found a lot of the time when we tried to talk to people would just say what they thought that we wanted to hear because they want to please us. And that was something tricky that we realized, that like we don't have a skill in this, and that it's so good to work with people from NGOs and social workers, because their skills are just so valuable for architects to learn from. And then there was also a couple of NGOs who were working on the project. One's called Sarth and one's called Ejibika. And they did some community workshops too. And then they would like kind of filter information for us to learn from as well.
Yeah. And then one final thing is that when people had started moving into our second project, particularly, we actually tried to do a bit of a questionnaire, which is maybe a typical architect's way of trying to get information, but we really found that wasn't so useful. We tried to craft a questionnaire with the right questions that we'd kind of learned from the NGOs and everything, but we found when we gave out the questionnaire that a lot of people were treating it like a test exam to pass, and they were all often trying to all get the same answer to then give back to us, rather than using it as a question. You know, we would expect everyone to have their own personal opinion.
Everyone was like looking at each other's like, what did you write? Okay, let's all write the same thing.
Yeah, particularly one group of men all had the exact same answer. I think that like,
and also, a lot of people wanting to like not insult us, I think. So people were so super nice, and we were asking, no, give us feedback. So like, what would you want done better next time? But but
I think Hannah really hits the point where NGOs and certain other agencies are really trained to have the skills to be able to come in and on day one communicate with people and respond to people and ask things in the right way where you can get useful information, whereas we had to rely on asking people that we had already spent a lot of time building up a relationship with. So if it was someone that we had known for a long time, we'd be able to end up maybe trying to have a real conversation. But ultimately a lot of observation. And if you see our project, the main things that we really tried to do are things that are based on observation. Like we really think that the drainage is one of the most important parts of the project, and the thing that led us to make better drainage is that so many sites have obvious water pooling, maybe right even into people's houses. And a lot of those kind of things you don't need to actually talk to people with. You just need to observe, record, and realize that's not good. We can do better.
But definitely a combination of both.
Yeah.
Because looking at the physical evidence doesn't always tell the full story, you know?
No, and of course, one of the major things that we battled against was the developers, one of them particularly thinking that the housing didn't need doors or windows because a lot of the original juggies didn't have doors. And we were able to then respond to him by saying, well, no, we've done workshops with the NGOs, and we've recorded from the labouring community that one of their most important things that they consider that they really, really want is to have security of doors and windows. And so we were able to use that and then achieve that result. Does that answer what you're trying to get at?
Yes, it answered 2-3 questions that I had.
Okay.
So like the other question was, can you give some insight of critical points that you used in your design after getting all this information? So other than the drainage and the doors, windows decision that you made, were there some other things as well? And also a little bit for follow-up question, like when you are relying on sources like NGOs and other agencies for information, don't you risk that the information would be moderated, like it's not in a pure state? So how do you information as well?
But I think that it's for me, my experience is that it would be in a better state than if we asked a question that might lead to an answer that isn't the answer of the question that we're asking. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but
it may be very different for a local person that they could engage with the community in a different way. But us being foreigners, whether we're talking to the labouring community or we were talking to the client developer, we often felt that there was different cultural or status-based different things that would get in the way of having a clean conversation anyway. we often would end up talking about communication problems to people and they would say, oh, well, you know, because you don't speak enough Hindi or Gujarati. And we found that language problems were nowhere near as complicated as just the cultural differences.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, what we were really trying to get at before is that the NGOs who specialize in this, we think that they were able to do a much better job at being able to come into a mass community. When we could have the time to build up relationships with people, we would take full advantage of that. We would really try talk as much as possible about different ways to do things. And we got really good feedback and, you know, communication on the first project because we were able to just live with them every day. We would eat dinner with them, would have lunches with them.
Yeah, like for example, Ajivika, who is the NGO that was working on the second project, like they've been working with specifically migrant laborers for like 20 or 30 years. So I think that like it's not only the information that they get, but the kind of context and the way that they frame the questions and the experience that they bring from their history and understanding of certain communities. So like it's just so invaluable if you're able to work with the right NGO and social impact consultancies that are good at their jobs. I'm not sure. I think we were really lucky. Like the developer that hired us also hired such good NGOs and and
I mean there may be good and bad architects that have different ways of communicating. There might be good and bad NGOs that have ways of communicating, but definitely the ones that we saw had much more training around being able to come in and get the right not the right responses. There's no right response sometimes, but they were able to frame questions in a way that we could get a lot of interesting information back.
I think though it's also tricky because it depends who's like paying them as well. So they have to be quite passionate about what they do. Otherwise they can be like bought, you know, like they like for example, to answer your question before, one of the workshops that we did with the labouring community was around communal cooking facilities. So the developers wanted to save money and just provide like one gas cooker between like 10 families or something. So wanted us to design these communal kitchen areas. And we were saying that like the laborers, they all start work at the same time. And food takes so long to make, it takes like 1 or 2 hours. So they're already waking up at, 4 and 5 in the morning anyway.
The woman are.
And so how will that work if everybody has to cook at the same time? There's only one thing to cook on. And they said no, it's really good. We will like put on a TV in the room and they'll all socialize and it will be this great thing. And then we did this workshop and we thought, maybe like 3 families can share together because we're like negotiating with the developers too.
I think as a thought experiment, we actually just pretty quickly got to how can 2 families even share one cooker?
So we were like negotiating this, and then we had this workshop, and then all the labouring, it was a woman, and they were just like, absolutely not, no way are we sharing gas cookers. Like it was a definite no. And I think that Fourth Wheel, who are facilitating that workshop, like they're always balancing like working within the realities of the project, but also quite like empathetic people that will just think about the realities in that community as well. So
and I think a lot of the time we had to really communicate with the NGOs and have good long discussions afterwards, even with them saying about what we thought the information meant versus what they thought the information meant. But we do think that they were bringing back a certain amount of information that was really useful to really them to then go off. And of course we would always have to weigh anything they say up against our real experience of observing labor colonies everywhere. And I think there probably was quite a few times that we would have ended up saying, based on the information that you're saying right now, we think it should be this way, and they thought it should be this way. And we, all like this, we would always be kind of reaching compromises with the NGOs and the developers and the clients. And often we were proved right when we ended up seeing the end result, like you might have seen with certain material choices and things. But
Okay. Can I ask a question? Yeah.
Yes.
You can, lovely background.
I wasn't
Thanks.
sure if it was a background.
So when you talk about drainage system, because it's a temporary shelter for the laborers, right? So when we think about drainage, it's kind of a permanent system, and because after some point of time they will be leaving the place where you guys have built. So how do you keep these things in mind? Like after a point of time, this drainage system will keep in use, or like it will be removed from the place. So what are the cost efficient things which you keep in mind, or something like that?
Regarding drainage, the main thing that we found that we could bring in as architects and designers was to say right from the start that can we please get the whole site graded with the slope, so that no matter what happened afterwards, any buildings going on, any kind of vegetation, that overall there's enough of a change in levels from a high point of the site to a low point of the site that water will naturally get its way down to the bottom, almost no matter what else is happening in between. And this was an interesting thing because this would cause a real delay to the project, because the developers wanted to grade the site after starting construction of the buildings. And we really, really pushed and said, that's a really inefficient way to do it. If right from the start, you get your big machines and just come along and just basically build up one side and dig out the other, whatever you need to do, so that overall the entire site where any potential housing might go is higher than a neighboring area, then it'll be fine in monsoon.
Yeah.
It will drain.
In the case for our second project, we were lucky because the neighboring plots are empty.
Yeah, and the canal
but
is
that
right
would
there.
have been an issue if there was like other housing next. Like that's not a rule to like flood the sites next to your site. Right?
Oh well, no, in monsoon,
Yeah.
It just has to go. But obviously, if you ever have a site where there's a potential for even a part of that site to be lower than any other place around, then that's where the water is going to be.
Yeah. So on that second project, it was basically just like really simple site sloping drainage, and then that led to bioswales.
Yeah, well, so from there, then we built in the more permanent concrete paths in between the units, which have their own little slope. And that's all things that we actually kind of somehow got. We don't even really know how we got that concreted, because there was other costs that we probably would have rather put that towards. But it was towards the end of the project, even just if that was all out of dirt, but it had a appropriate kind of slope built in, that would have worked well enough to have the water draining away and then down to the lower drainage pipe that we had built. But we tried to basically have as many things happening naturally through the whole site surfaces as possible, knowing that in monsoon everything's just going to be flowing somewhere. But I think it was towards the end of the project that one of the developers or the project manager thought, oh, we've got a bit of concrete. It'll be nice to just have those concreted between the units. And just that one little bit, make sure that all the area in between the units is much nicer during monsoon. But then I think some things that didn't quite, the bioswales are more for the toilet system. There was some toilet system drainage that also was spent a long time being thought about. We don't know if it ever got built, actually completed. We ended up leaving before a bioswale system from the toilets biotanks would basically, it drops out clean water, and we were going to run that through a kind of winding, slowly sloping down, basically pathway just for water drainage, which then allows it enough time to just slowly go and then evaporate into the ground. And thinking about levels is probably one of the main things to just always start off with.
And our first project had a soak pit, 2 soak pits.
Oh, we built 2 large monsoon, basically water recharge wells as a soak pit on the first project, because we had the space for it. But basically that's kind of like an overflow monsoon system, where we had just a large brick-lined but not mortared pit that all of the water from the roofs and shower and kitchen would drain down into.
Yeah.
And then it can soak back into the ground, taking its time.
Yeah. And that I think that worked well, but there was this problem where there was a leaking tap for like a year and a half and nobody fixed it until we went to a site visit and noticed. And so that it'd been like filling up.
Yeah.
And it hadn't been working. So we had the infrastructure, but no one had fixed a leaking tap. So none of it was working for several months.
Everything needs a bit of maintenance. This was a leaking tap that pretty much meant that a whole soak pit didn't work as a soak pit because it was completely soaked all the time.
Yeah, which is interesting because on our second project, we like spent so long trying to get the procurement team to spend like 50 rupees more per tap and get better quality taps that wouldn't break. And they're trying to save money on like taps. It's just like a little detail, like one tap that's a poorer quality tap to save like a small amount of money compared to the cost that it will take to not have like drainage working for a year. It was just so it's interesting, these like really, really small details that have huge implications as well. But
to sum that up, I think like major machine works do possible before you've built anything, because you can do it so much easily before then. If we had to try and make site levels happen after we'd already started construction of flooring, a lot of all the structure would have got in the way of big machines, and we probably would have had to do it like by just carrying buckets of dirt on our head and packing up the site, rather than being able to use any kind of machine. Even if you're just using a car or something, you can end up, dumping dirt and grading it out and making slope. So do the civil works as you can first, and then just don't save money on taps. Like one broken tap, which those little cheap colorful plastic ones often break, and even the style of the tap that can turn off on the farm, a lot of the taps they installed at the farm at first were very smooth edged kind of things that you have to turn 100 times, and a lot of people just wouldn't turn taps off because they just couldn't be bothered. But if it's just one big crank where it's off and on, and you can easily see that, you can maintain the system so much easier. And one broken tap that's putting out a bit of water can end up soaking the ground and ruining a whole like natural drainage system.
We like measured how much the tap was leaking. It was like 1 litre per minute.
A litre per minute.
A litre per minute.
It would fill up our giant soak pit in 4 days or something. And of course, they're trying to empty it out with a water pump truck every now and then, but they just they put much more work into not fixing the problem than they could have just into fixing the problem. But that's plumbing and any kind of drainage stuff was a hard conversation a lot of the time. We found a lot of resistance to having straightforward conversations about plumbing and drainage and sewage, or anything that was relating to potential works in the ground that might be a little bit messy. But that's so much important work. All the stuff below ground, making sure that works, that the whole project works, is so important. Did that answer everything?
Yeah. Thank you.
So when you are working on such projects where your clients, they want to have a very low cost things and has to happen very quickly, what are the hurdles that you face, like the big prominent ones?
Those are the hurdles.
those sounds of the hurdles. But even within that right now, we found a really interesting point that sometimes you have to be quite confident and strong to say, actually, if you want this done cheaply, let's not start straight away. Let's think about it a bit more. Let's plan about it a bit more. And, a little bit of time planning can end up saving so much time on the build that even if you started 2 months later, you might finish before the original one, where if you just started straight away. And
the biggest issues though were that there was no like precedent for what we were doing. So we couldn't a lot of people, apart from the person that hired us, didn't really understand what we were doing. And so there wasn't a lot of motivation to get it done or to invest anything into it. Even though a lot was invested into it. But the other thing that was most difficult for us was actually having labor to build it for a lot of the time, because we were having to share a lot of the laborers with the main apartment buildings that were being built. So, you know, there was like 6 weeks where we had no laborers apart from just me and Mason building it.
And I think there was another 4 weeks where we just had 2 elderly women from Dahod.
Yeah. But so that was hard. Like, I think that if we were to do it again, we would definitely want to just have our own team. Like we had in our first project, we had a team that we were hiring kind of directly and that we were working alongside and that we could manage. But in our second project, because the laborers were changing all the time, like there'd be laborers coming for 2 days and would teach them and work with them on a specific detail or constructing something, and then they would leave. And so someone else would come 2 days later and we have to start again training people and
teaching these unfamiliar construction techniques because they were only used to brick construction.
So but
these things came from a lack of understanding from the people in power. I mean, it sometimes felt like intentional sabotage, but we really do think it was just that the certain people in power that were controlling the labor didn't see our project as a priority. To them, they wanted to get the apartments
also
built.
Because they're such a huge company that they have so many things that they need to deal with, that we're like, you know, we were told this often, we're not even on the list of things to do. We were, even though they're paying us monthly salary, a good one too, they we didn't have a team. And I think that I think
even
that
though
my advice,
we were kicking up a fuss a lot, but they didn't mind paying us to have us around even when it was just us two building it.
At one stage, they said, "Oh, you haven't had any laborers," because I was complaining too much. And then so they gave us 30 laborers all at once in the dark at night shift. They came all at once, like they're all speaking different languages, and we didn't have enough work for that many people at that time.
Yeah, because we weren't prepared for that.
It was like 0 to 30 in the dark.
But I mean, if we'd had, we calculated this and we actually asked for 15 laborers from the start. And we did calculate the amount of labor that we had. We counted it all the time and then counted how long it actually took to build the project. But if that had been averaged out to be 15 laborers a day, the project would have taken 4 months. And I think now that there's a precedent that, you know, you could go along and talk to a client and say that was technically built in 4 months with 15 laborers. They can see that and they can know what it is, and then they can say, well, I might actually want to do the same thing, but I'll put 30 laborers onto it. And if you know that from the start, you can maybe get that done in 2 months. Or even you probably could still do it in 2 months with the same laborers if you just have a good plan. But the main thing is that without the precedent, not many people understood, and so they weren't. There's a lot of different arguments that we really thought should have made sense, that like it really should have made sense for them to get rid of us earlier, like just give us laborers, finish the project, then they would have had their own laboring community living in better living conditions, and they could have worked better on their apartment buildings. But sometimes these things just don't seem to end up in realistic ways making logical sense somehow. And so I think like my advice for any architectural proposal working for communities and having these complicated relationships would be to kind of design a project that includes a team to build it. I guess it depends like what the project is, what the context is, but something that where the design is like half, it's a kind of modular system that's like half assembled off site and then kind of be put together quite simply on site with a trained team. Like the trained team is so important. But the more precedents there are out there, and the more networks where the kind of people working on these projects can pull together and have these resources where other people can go and look at that and say, well, that's how they did it, that's how they did it, that's how they did it. The more these kind of things shouldn't be problems anymore.
So my next question is about choice of materials. So structures has to be a really low cost, and sometimes the period in which they'll be used is not fixed. So how do you find that balance of having low cost materials but also vandalism proof, or having a good life of materials in weather like Ahmedabad? I guess like the materials that we proposed didn't get selected. They didn't get built how we wanted it.
It's really hard. Like, I think that, no, but that's going back to the last point Mason was just saying was about like precedent, but now there's a precedent now that we can show our project and say, look, they used the cheapest PVC sheet here and it didn't last. It's like broken because the sun has made it crack and all of this stuff. So it's actually costing more money to replace it. So it's better to invest in higher quality materials that are more durable from the start for a longer, more cost efficient. Yeah, there was like a lot of like, just do the cheapest and we'll work it out later. But
we should explain
now,
with some actual numbers. Like we at least would have gone for 2 wall polycarbonate plastic sheeting instead of the PVC. That was, I think, about 40 rupees a square foot compared to 15 rupees for the PVC at the time. So it's about 3 times as the cost. But it would have lasted far more than 3 times as long. It absolutely would make sense.
One of the bosses said, like, as Mason said before, oh no, don't put in doors. These laborers, they don't need doors. They don't need windows. And so they just wanted to put steel sheets across the whole front, like without a door. Just one opening to get it. Yeah.
So the way that we achieved.
So the way that we achieved that was to try and create a facade that was the same price as just having steel sheets. So we ended up having to use that PVC, and we kind of like proposed that as, look, this is one option, but if you spend a little bit more in polycarbonate, it'll last much longer. And so they went for the cheapest. They said, oh, only PVC sheet we can use.
But that's because they were comparing, the only thing they could imagine was steel corrugated sheets, because that's the only thing they had ever seen before in Ahmedabad. So we had to create something that had sliding windows and a door at the same price for steel sheets. Now anyone else can look at our project and say, well, that's the cost there, but if we increase the cost a little bit, it's going to last longer, and potentially you might be able to build up and end up doing, every project could be slightly better and better, but every cost for something that's going to be reused also will then end up saving money as it gets reused. And we know there's a lot of materials in our project which might last 5-10 different site shifts, and others like the floor, which costs a lot of money, which won't be able to be shifted, which is not what we would have done. We would have done concrete, maybe slab, 1 meter by 1 meter removable panels to shift it onto the next site. We would have got pretty much the same result, but with something that could be reused. But that's the nature of negotiation, with different people having different ideas and relationship things. But
and I guess another point for us was that, like, while we were building it, it was so important, even though it took so much longer, to make sure that there were no unnecessary like drill holes or mistakes or like, for example, they could have just like drilled the steel sheets into the scaffolding poles, right? And we were like, no, it has to be those hose pipe clamps, and we want it to be a really neat like slit, and we don't want any unnecessary like holes or breakages or anything that can act like a broken window theory. Do you know broken window theory? Do you know this concept? Like, if something's damaged to start with, it just gets damaged more and more and more. So for us, it was really important from the start.
Just to explain a bit further of that, like, it could have been so easy, and many people at many times during the installation process of the walls said, can we just drill these directly into the structural, scaffolding pole? And that would have been fine if it was a one-off project. But the next time that you come around to try to do it, it's very unlikely that you'll ever have any kind of screws lining up again with the exact hole that it was in. So you're going to put in another hole. And then you end up doing, 3-4 projects, and then you've potentially just got Swiss cheese steel structure. And the more that happens, the more that it's just going to rust out and not be able to be, reused, or at the end of the day, you can't sell it for scrap for as higher, and recoup costs.
I'm thinking about materials, though. One interesting thing is that we went back to see the Haryana project like 2 years after it was built, right?
Yeah.
And we thought that we did like mud dung walls on that project, and we thought that would have not be in very good condition, but actually that was one of the best condition things that were there. And it was just like given a lime wash coat when we got there and kind of fixed up. But
that project even has a mud dung roof on top of the steel sheets.
That material worked so well. So it's kind of like this idea that allowing some materials that are really organic that can just kind of crumble away if they need to, or you can kind of scratch them away and then redo them somewhere else. That like mud and dung are such amazing materials. That was incredible for like climatic insulation and sound insulation, which was so dignified for that community that were living in the first project. And just like having a thick wall was just so amazing. And one thing in our second project, it was so sad having those like horrible thin steel walls. And we tried to propose in our second project, like, oh, let's do mud and dung walls. It's so cheap and like easy and such a great material, but no, didn't happen.
Cultural reasons, we think. But just a little bit further on, I found it interesting in your question, you're saying how to kind of guard against vandalism. And we actually found that the main thing that we were trying to design around at first regarding the higher cost items like steel sheets, I wouldn't call vandalism, even if it might amount to the same thing of like basically putting holes in the material. Basically, it's just that in many sites that we visited, there's almost nothing inside the room to respond to in any way, to build off or to hang on. Many existing colonies are fully just vertical steel sheets, basically on 4 sides, with one of them just being a door that has a bit of an extra frame. And we saw, and so we knew that if it gets built like that, the first thing that will happen is someone's going to put a hole in the steel sheets to then put a hook or, to tie something to put twine through. And so I think one of the major things around looking after one of the main materials that we had to use in this project was to have the structural system have its own modular bay at a height which could be added onto. There was always ideas that could be potentially shelving added onto that layer, or at least ropes tied between that layer, and then other things happening. And as you might have seen, we ended up supplying examples of how rebar S hooks can just hang over that area and start making a lot of hooks. And we ended up seeing the family that you visit, the caretaker family, still have maybe a whole like kitchen bench that was made of really thick rebar that just came down and actually supported a good like 400 mm bench. That kind of thing is possible when there's something to like attach to. But when there's nothing there, it's going to get destroyed. People need to adapt it to their needs to some degree. And we think that the structural system and everything that we did is a much more flexible space than essentially just vertical nothingness around you.
Thank you. Simran will take forward.
Yeah. So could you give us an idea about what type of foundations should be used in such temporary projects?
Foundations. The main thing that we wanted to create for the dignity of the workers and health reasons was a floor that is lifted high enough above the ground so that it's actually flood proof or drainage proof at least. So if you see on our site where we created the slope that goes from one side to the other, we I think all the housing we actually did with their floor level at the same level. That technically wasn't necessary, but it made it a bit easier for us for the construction. But because of all of that being done, we had to do plinths around all of those. And then we backfilled with a bit and then did a concrete slab, which could have just been concrete panels or something laid down. And that's the main thing around the actual lifestyle of it, in terms of what people could actually really appreciate and use. A plinth wall with some sort of kind of fill to make a nice surface to live on. But apart from that, in terms of the structural foundations, our columns, if you've seen Instagram or something, come down into a little concrete bucket cast that we did that has hooks. And actually, this is something that we're not too sure of how much we actually need to like size. We had a lot of guesses and some talks with engineers, but essentially with a lightweight structure like we were doing, especially one that has an open air gap for ventilation underneath, one of the biggest risks that you'll have is that wind can actually lift the whole building up. And you'll never know quite which way it will do that. It might just lift the roofing sheets off the structure. But if all of that is fixed appropriately, one of the things that can definitely happen is that it actually lifts the whole column with like whatever it's like on out. And so that's why we thought it was very important to have the column coming down and bolted into basically a lump of concrete. And the easiest way that Hannah designed in her original thesis to do that was to cast those in concrete buckets. Engineering wise, how much of all that is needed is really hard to say. And we should also say that foundations are one thing, but the bracing that's required to have all that kind of stand upright and work in the right way, that's also quite hard to say how much exactly is needed. But we had a lot of temporary bracing that would happen as we were under construction. And then once that concrete floor was poured, that locked in a lot of it all in place, which if we weren't using a concrete slab and we just had different panels that came and sat in that could be reused, we might have had to rethink that a little bit. We might have needed to add on a bit more bracing in different areas. But ultimately, once the concrete floor was in, and then especially once the walls went on, they acted as a bracing walls and a diaphragm that holds it all together, and really, I think, has been good, yeah, so far. And our first project on the farm that had a steel sheet roof, our one was covered in about 4 inches of mud and dung, so it actually has a heavy roof insulation layer on top of the actual roof, and then that's covered in a plastic tarp just to waterproof it. But that survived a storm with 100k winds, 100 km winds, when a neighboring agricultural structure had the whole roof torn off.
That's right, yeah.
So far from our experience of what we've been done, we know that it's good enough. We don't know how much we might have over-engineered things, but we're always happier to be on that side of the equation. Yeah.
Have you seen our Instagram page? We have like process images of building the foundations as well. If you scroll quite a bit back down to...
Yeah, I just shared it to them on the WhatsApp group.
Oh, cool.
So they can have a look.
Yeah, so we tried to show the process as much as possible, and so we showed like casting the foundations in the bucket, and then putting these. We got these. What were they again? Like bolted things that the scaffolding clipped into.
Oh, we used roofing J hooks.
Roofing J hooks,
into the concrete bucket. But we should also say that those concrete buckets themselves, they were all like a uniform height because they were cast in buckets. And what we did was sit them on little concrete pads that leveled them up to the right level as well. And that was like all that part of the construction took a lot longer than expected. But if you don't have all of your structure sitting at the right level, if 2 columns next to each other, one's higher than the other, then all of the pre-made stuff that needs to fit in between for the scaffolding, it just wouldn't work, and then the walls wouldn't come on. And so we spent a good time leveling it, and that also acts as a bit of a concrete pad. But also in terms of the drainage and building the site up, if your site is not up at a higher area than potentially neighboring areas, you risk the fact that water might come in and change the ground conditions and cause certain of these areas to sink. But if you're always trying to have the highest site possible, you have less of a chance of that happening.
Yeah. So talking specifically about this Ahmedabad site, the plumbing and electric junctions were provided by the builders. So what would you suggest that would be an efficient way to provide these facilities in case of a transit camp?
Do you know the foundation called SELCO? SELCO? they're based in Bangalore, and they specialize in solar panels and electrifying rural areas. They do really amazing work, and I think that they're doing more and more for migrant communities. Like they've even got pilots of some migrant housing, which are really great. But they, like, if you look at their website and their Instagram and their projects, they might have some good kind of off the grid examples of solar panels and solar power. Yeah,
yeah.
That's one. Just a first thought for electricity. For what was the other one?
Sanitation.
Sanitation. So we used do you know those bio toilets? What are they called? The
Bunker bioloos.
Bunker Bioloo.
Yeah.
They're a company in Hyderabad, and they supplied the toilet, the infrastructure. But they also work with like temporary transient.
Smaller options,
they told me that they do like disaster relief type projects. Where it's basically like a chamber, like this box that the sewage goes into, and it gets processed through like 5 chambers and then comes out. That's what we used on our project. But he said that those, it's what they use on trains sometimes now as well. Bunker Bioloo, you could look at their website.
I think they're working on different options that suit different places. But
another kind of like low tech one was, I guess you can't go there now, but what was the institute we went to see all the toilets?
Like, I can't remember. What's the toilet institute in Ahmedabad called? Out by the Sabarmati somewhere? Yeah,
they've got one next to like the Sabarmati ashram, and then there's another one which is designed by some great architect. I can't remember.
Oh, I forgot.
They've got, there's like this, it's called like Center for Environmental, no, that it's.
Oh wait, you mean CE, Center for Environment and Education?
No, sorry, it's not that. It's like, as I was saying that, I was thinking, oh no, it's not that.
I think the name is quite similar to that, but it's definitely not CEE because we know that one well. Are you typing it?
Oh no.
But so we visited there to learn more about the Sulab style toilets, which we built on the first project on the farm, and they had different examples of that, and it was really, really interesting to see a lot of the different ways that they've been looking at developing this. And I mean, obviously, any higher cost things like the bioloos that you have to dig a big pit with and install, and then you would want to maybe take that with you, that might be harder than maybe building a Sulab style pit, which you could just leave there potentially, or just like fill in and cover up. But definitely all sanitation systems have negatives that can really usually only be compromised, that you have to settle for. We find it's always one of the hardest things to design well, and that's why we have to put so much attention into it. But if there's any existing infrastructure that you can tie into, it makes things a lot easier. But I think that there's definitely a couple of good NGOs that are working on the best solutions possible for more disconnected and temporary transient situations.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but there's like the center next to Sabarmati Ashram. And then they've also got one like slightly outside of Ahmedabad.
Out of town to the north.
Yeah, where we went there and visited and learnt about those Sulab toilets.
It's probably quite worth just even visiting the one just at the Sabarmati ashram though.
But yeah, that system worked well, and the Sulab 2-pit system, and that's, I mean, it's like, it's not, how temporary are your sediments that you're designing? How transient are they?
Yeah. So I guess you have already answered about the community kitchen and the drainage system. So,
so she's asking how temporary your transit settlements are supposed to be, if you can.
Yeah, what time are you designing for?
Sorry.
Are the people there for like 1 week or 2 weeks or like 4 months or a year? How temporary? How long is the camp there?
So according to what we have learned till now, so it can go up till years. People that who are staying there, it can go up till years.
I want to say something about
that. So it could be for, you could do like a Sulab toilet 2-pit system as well, right?
Are you all familiar with Sulab pits?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one interesting point that you just reminded me of that Hannah really realized from her original studies was that a lot of people in power really tried to portray a lot of the colonies as more temporary than they were. And by doing that, they were able to kind of shut down a lot of conversation around improving the conditions, because it would always be kind of said, oh no, but this is only temporary. And the more temporary it is, the more that they think that people can put up with things. But once you start realizing how permanent a lot of these situations are, the more that you can, you know, especially if you show or like really, calculate how long that you think these might be for, you might realize that they're much more permanent than other people might be saying, or that you might have even thought originally. And the more permanent it is, the more chance that you have of convincing people in investment, and maybe, you know, adding a bit more cost, or just investment of labor up front, like doing a little bit more work to make it better right from the start. Because you realize, you know, yeah, some labor colonies are going to be there for 10 years. There's going to be kids that are growing up their half their childhood on site and everything. And then it really does make it worth it. Or if you have more chance of convincing someone that it's worth it to have a better system. So I guess we would say, yeah, you always have to base it on a time frame and what you can get away with. You know, do the best thing possible. Always aiming for the best thing possible.
Yeah, so there's one last question. So as designers, we understand the importance of such projects like housing for laborers, but how do we encourage builders to invest in such projects and understand the value of them?
I mean, this is something that we've been trying to work on for a long time. And back to one of our previous answers, we always think that the more precedents there are, the more you're able to potentially convince, because you can base it off something real that someone can go and look at. When there's no precedents, or very little, or only other like precedents that aren't that good because they're just an engineer designing something, or something like this, the harder it is for people to imagine. And then if they can't imagine it, they're not going to be convinced of it. But the more precedents there are, the more that you can potentially start getting into real conversations around how much it actually might benefit a builder. And we think that improving the conditions of the workers is something that will absolutely actually help the builder and potentially help their business, not just through good marketing or branding that they can do more when they show how well they're treating their workers, but actually through the productivity of the workers, and therefore the quality of the builder's construction. And we hate to like bring it straight to that, because although we think that's true, we really think that our work is more about just caring for the workers and giving them a dignity that they deserve, no matter what they're doing, what profession they're in, what they're doing. No one should really be living in the conditions like we see a lot of the time, ones that are actually seriously unhealthy, or even at least just undignified. But builders, it's hard because it's a cultural system at the moment. It's a whole system that's happening across a lot of let's maybe say Northwest India at least, and until I think that's probably the only answer that we're really going to get. Until there's certain precedents that people can start seeing that a change is happening, only then might they feel.
But I think
that
also
they need to change.
Like when we went back last time, I don't know if you met Vikas, he's the site manager. He was saying to us, oh, it's been like, obviously this was before COVID, but he was saying to us, oh, it's been so much better, so much more productive on site. Laborers are staying for a longer period of time. The buildings are going up faster. we've had a much, he said even during low labor season, like they usually struggle having 50 laborers, but during the lowest labor season before COVID, they had 200 laborers. So they were able to be much more efficient. So were you saying this before?
Yeah, so basically, that's one example. We hope that other developers will hear the same things from this developer, but we're not sure how much that will have.
One thing that we wanted to do was like, maybe if we did PhDs on this topic or something, to start to collect data around like what the economic advantages were to providing better accommodation. So to show to developers, like from a business point of view, they actually make more money if they provide better housing. So it's like a smarter business decision.
We think we'd probably
just in terms of productivity, laborers not being as sick, they don't take time off work, they're happier and healthier, and they stay for longer.
We think we'd probably need to be doing a PhD to have the time and backing to go and do a thorough enough study to show all that in actual numbers and everything. But hopefully, even just by itself right now, it's made a big change to the one builder, and we hope and sometimes hear that the different things that they're planning at their different sites around the country. And even if it's just changing one builder at a time, that's one thing. But hopefully, there will just be a start to being more systematic change around India.
Yeah, so if anyone has any other questions, they can ask. This was all from my side.
Thank you.
So I just sent in the chat the Environmental and Sanitation Institute. I found it. That's the one I was talking about. And I'm just seeing on our Instagram page, it's how I got reminded of what it was called, is a post from 2017 where I took a picture of a earthen pot latrine, and that has like 4 pots underneath. It's quite cool. But they had lots of like really amazing, interesting designs and example at that place. But it's off Ring Road. I don't know if it's open. Kind of on the way to Gandhinagar. Yeah.
But just north of the outer Ring Road from the city, and it was a nice place to visit.
Yeah, the staff were really helpful.
Any toilet system that has to rely on someone manually cleaning out things, we think is really problematic.
Yeah, so that is a big problem with those sulab pits. Is that like, it relies on like manual removing of shit, which is terrible.
Which is a horrible thing to do.
Like for us, in our culture, like Mason grew up on a farm, so he is not so like, he wouldn't mind cleaning shit out of a pit because it's like dry and it doesn't smell after how many years? 1 or 2 years.
Well, it depends the size, the capacity, but typically they're designed so that in 1 year it's all dried out and it's not smelly. You can just jump in. It's like digging out hay or something, straw.
So like that. But that's not the same thing in India, where like the caste system is so bad, and so that system is like, we don't really understand how that's such a mainstream thing. I guess it's just like so necessary for so much of rural areas which are off the grid. But we do. So that's why we ended up using the bunker biolu system in the second project, is because it's like no one has to touch poo. Yeah,
we'd love to study more sulab pits and ones that get built around and see how they're actually functioning or not. But we definitely think that any system that relies on someone manually cleaning anything near the shit areas risks a big possibility of just that not actually happening.
Not working. Yeah. But one like that one I was just talking about with those pots, I don't know if you guys see that in my Instagram post from Hatch Workshop, but that's an interesting idea, because then like maybe someone could just take that whole earthen pot, and maybe if the earthen pot was like porous enough that it wasn't, like things could go out of it slightly, maybe that whole thing could just be kind of like removed and then buried.
And creates a bit more separation.
It creates separation, so you don't actually take the poo out. It's like it contained in a kind of pot.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good thing to look into a bit more. And it's not that different from a lot of systems that we have here, where like in rural areas or something, where just the container gets removed and you put a new container and you deal with it a bit like in a much cleaner way, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, I guess Raji, Simran, did you all collect everyone's questions and you all have asked everything?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anybody from the conversation, would you all like final opportunity to ask?
What was that guy's name? Okay.
CG?
What was his company called?
I'm just trying to remember.
Yeah.
Okay, I think they're done.
Okay, cool.
But in case they do have some questions, I can collate them and send them back to you all.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, cool. We're just thinking about like more off the grid systems of the like waste and composting and stuff.
We're answering a question that you haven't asked, but we love talking about it because the whole rubbish and waste system was such a hard thing to work out as well. And like the broken window theory, like the more that rubbish starts collecting around, the more that people might end up disrespecting the area. And we found that we really tried to create something that people would respect from the start. And the first day that it changed from a construction site into somewhere where someone took their shoes off before coming inside, we thought, oh, we might be achieving that here. One of the engineers or something. But in terms of rubbish, so I mean, on this Ahmedabad project, we're told that mosquito-borne diseases went down by like 80% from before it was built to when it was built. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is like the gas providing of the cookers, because before that people were walking through the fields and collecting wood or walking through to buy wood. It's because of the toilets that people aren't going and open defecating in the fields anymore. They're going to the toilets. But another thing apparently is that rubbish collecting around the site is one of the worst mosquito breeding grounds, because even a little chip packet can collect a little bit of water and mosquitoes just jump straight in it. And so we found that like the whole sanitation of black waste and everything, talking about rubbish was something that was really hard for a lot of people to do. But in Baroda, we found an amazing person that's been working with many different communities, looking at waste systems and basically trying to at least separate out the stuff that can be composted, and then having incentives provided to try collect off the other rubbish into different areas. And just by getting all of the compostable things into a system that can be composted makes all the rest of the rubbish so much easier to deal with. And we're just trying to remember his name. We actually just can't quite remember what it was. But yeah, Vadodara-based composting establishment, and we went and visited his house where he had built Concept Biotech, Dr. Sunit Dabka.
But he was really knowledgeable about labouring communities, and he thought about things really holistically. And so he invented these sort of really fast composting systems where he built these barrels that you can spin and it composts it, all the wet waste. And then he was also kind of fermenting some of the waste and turning it into
bokashi.
Yeah, like Japanese.
He basically took a Japanese anaerobic system and did that in a way where he was creating a fertilizer that people could use for vegetation and stuff. So this kind of stuff can really tie in if you have any kind of potential brief for a project where people are also gardening. You can really start getting this going full circle potentially. But one of his main things that we saw him do that he brought insight with was creating incentives to collect recyclable rubbish. And that really did show us that with so many things about a labouring community, you can try design it and you can think that people might use it one way, but unless there's a good reason for someone to do it, unless it's the easiest way to do it rather than just throwing the rubbish over the fence or something, people will just do whatever's easiest for them or most common, or what they think other people are doing. So to create a whole, clean site where everything's working in harmony. This was a massive thing that we had to try bring in, and
he's amazing.
We didn't succeed on our site with him.
But he's so knowledgeable, and he's got like a PhD in waste management. And like, if you, I don't know, just an idea, like he would be so helpful to talk to for students. Like, just he's really generous as well with his time. But I don't think his website's working, so I just sent his name. It looks like his company's temporarily closed. I guess that's normal.
Who knows what's happening over COVID?
But we tried so hard to get him to come and manage the waste systems and like set them up, but in the end, the company went with something else. But that's another story.
Well, we probably should explain a little bit.
These guys might have to go.
Well, unless there's any other questions, then we're happy to answer any others that you might send through later.
Yeah, I think we can, when they start to develop things further, they perhaps may have some more questions, and we can write back to you all. I will shortly share with you a Google Drive link. We have photographs that we've taken of your project, so we'll send that to you so you can have a look. And thank you so much, Mason.